Let me ask you a question, folks. What if Harry Potter never existed at Universal Orlando Resort? It's an interesting question. No Hogsmeade, no Diagon Alley. I mean, that opens up a lot of space at the parks. No Forbidden Journey, no Hagrid's, no Gringotts. I mean, those are a lot of great rides you're getting rid of. And here's the real kicker, the real punch in the gut, if you will. No Butterbeer. Yeah, that one hurts. But I'll tell you what, there are definitely some people out there who are like, you know what? I would be totally down if Harry Potter was taken out of the parks. It takes up too much space, too much valuable space that could be used for other IPs and other properties that could make for great attractions. Well, today, folks, we're going to explore that reality. That's right, folks. We are going multiverse jumping, timeline hopping. Time may be an ever-flowing river, but today we are going back in time. Get back, Marty, is what construction worker Jimothy Anderson said to his co-worker Marty Williams as they began construction on the new attraction for Islands of Adventure back in 2009 in this new empty expansion plot that, as we know in our reality, was used for Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey. However, in this reality, it's being used for something entirely different. With Universal not getting the Harry Potter rights, they used that massive budget to go ahead and build a new attraction that was actually originally planned with the park. This attraction, being an expansion of the Jurassic Park land, would be a helicopter tours attraction that would take you over the Jurassic Park world. Speculated to use the same or similar technology that Forbidden Journey ended up using, or maybe something like Soarin', it would take you over the many exhibits and areas of the Jurassic Park with, of course, things not going exactly to plan, with many close encounters with dinosaurs that would surely nearly get you killed and surely give you a lawsuit if this was actually realistic. Now, one thing to note is that this attraction is only taking up space in that expansion plot, meaning that the back half of Lost Continent, Merlinwood, where Flying Unicorn, Dueling Dragons, and other shops and restaurants were, is going to still exist and stay standing here. On top of this, by not expanding to an entire land and spending that much money, Universal was able to save a bit of that money and put it towards other attractions. In this case, you look back a year earlier to 2009 and you look at Rip Ride Rocket. Instead of using the kind of obscure and small roller coaster manufacturer in Mauer, they instead decide to splurge a little bit and go with a much more higher end roller coaster manufacturer, in this case, Intamin. Now at this point, Universal has never worked with Intamin. Up to this point, they've only worked with B&M, so you might be saying, why not go B&M? Especially considering that Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket's sister attraction over in Japan was built by B&M, so why not get a B&M? Well, a few reasons. One, there's not a lot of space to work with, right? Hollywood Ride Rocket is a very compact attraction that doesn't have much land to work with. B&M usually likes to have a lot of land to work with. They don't build small, compact coasters like that, and they usually have really long and big, drawn-out elements, and you just wouldn't be able to do that in this space. On top of this, Intamin seems to just be like the better overall choice. They seem to be more experienced in what Universal wants. You got a vertical lift hill on this. Fahrenheit just opened up a year earlier, and it has a vertical lift hill, right? Building something like Fahrenheit that has a decent amount of inversions, but then, gets those brake runs in that you need for capacity's sake, would totally be up Intamin's alley. So, a little recap for you here. 2009, we get the upgraded version of Hollywood Ride Rocket. A year later, we get the Jurassic Park expansion with the helicopter tours attraction. Now, unlike the Harry Potter expansion, which was a huge success and brought a ton of attendance and a ton of revenue to the parks that year, well, guess what? The helicopter tours did not bring in the same type of crowd. Yes, Jurassic Park is still very popular. It's going to end up being the anchor for the whole resort, really, going forward. But the bottom line is, it's not going to have the same impact that Harry Potter did on the resort. So what does that really mean? Well, that means that Universal is going to have a little bit less money to spend going forward, which means that we're not necessarily going to see a one-for-one replacement on every single new attraction that was added over the last decade or so. So really, our first indirect negative from not getting Harry Potter at the parks. On that note, in 2011, a year after Helicopter Tours, we get nothing at the parks. Only thing that happens is Jimmy Neutron still closes. I know, sorry. I guess some people really like this attraction. Unfortunate. It still goes. And it is still going to be replaced by Despicable Me Minion Mayhem in 2012. Despicable Me was just too big of a phenomenon, merchandising-wise and at the box office, for Universal to ignore it in really any reality. So yes, Despicable Me still comes in 2012. Also in 2012, Spider-Man still gets its HD upgrade. Although yes, that obviously took a lot of time and took money for Universal to spend, it makes sense when you look at the Marvel contract. They need to keep the land and the attractions in the land updated and up to date in order to retain the license, or else Disney and Marvel could easily pull it under the rug. So this HD upgrade makes sense where Universal would end up spending the money. However, the other major thing of note that happens in 2012 is that Jaws closes to make way for Diagon Alley. With Diagon Alley never coming around because guess what? Harry Potter doesn't exist anymore at these parks. Then Jaws has no reason to close. Universal doesn't have the money at this point to build a whole new land, and they don't really have a property that's worth doing that for at the moment. So Jaws stays open. Yeah, let's go. But not forever.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
In 2013, we still get Transformers The Ride. The big reason being is that this attraction was already built at Hollywood and Singapore in years prior, meaning that the graphics were already invested in, that money was already spent. It makes sense that this get added as it'd be a much cheaper attraction to build than something straight up new. On top of this, with Simpsons proving to be a merchandising powerhouse and proving to be worthy of being another anchor for the park, it still gets its fast food boulevard expansion over the previous World Expo food court area. And once again, however, there's another thing that opens in 2013 that in this reality never happens, or at least doesn't open in 2013, and that's Cabana Bay. Cabana Bay does not open in 2013. Simply put, that there's no reason to build another hotel right now. Universal's not pulling enough attendance, and they're not making enough money to where it makes any sense to build another hotel in 2013. They are not at that level yet. They're still pulling attendance kind of on the similar level to SeaWorld, really. Like, they're probably a little bit higher than SeaWorld at this point, but let's be honest, they're still at that level. They're not really competing with Disney yet. Doesn't make any sense why they would build another hotel at this point. In 2014, in our reality, as we all know, Diagon Alley and Hogwarts Express opened up. However, of course, with no Harry Potter, that doesn't happen. So there's a little bit of extra money to be spent, right? Obviously, most of the money that went towards Diagon Alley and Hogwarts Express came from Harry Potter and that impact, but Universal in this reality still has a bit of money to spend on a new attraction. And where does that go to? It goes over to Islands of Adventure for a new attraction in Seuss Landing, being based around The Grinch. That's right, folks. We are getting the highly rumored and the highly sought after, I suppose you can call it, Mount Crumpet roller coaster. Though details on this shelved attraction, I guess you could call it, are somewhat slim, I would imagine it'd be somewhat similar to maybe like the Matterhorn over at Disneyland, and would also potentially connect both parks in some realities. That was an original idea, that maybe it would come over and build a station over at the Studios Park and connect them, kind of like the Hogwarts Express does in our reality, you know. And I wonder if that is still possible with this Willow Mini Mayhem being built. I guess you would have to get rid of Blue Man Group to build the station. For our purposes, we'll just say Blue Man Group stays and Mount Crumpet only exists over at Islands of Adventure. In 2015, I believe not much changes. You gotta remember, this is the year that Jurassic World comes out and makes over $1 billion at the box office, so Universal overall as a company is doing pretty decent. As a result of this, Raptor Encounter still opens, and I do think that Nintendo partnership still gets announced. I think that it still comes together. However, it's definitely easily understandable that it would not happen in many realities, simply because a big reason why Nintendo was willing to sign on with Universal is because of how well they handled Harry Potter and the fact that the parks got so much bigger after Harry Potter. Without Harry Potter, is Nintendo willing to take the risk and team up with Universal? Because you gotta remember, Nintendo has been pretty stingy and pretty picky about who they work with when it comes to their IPs. So who knows? But for our purposes, let's say that Nintendo decides, you know what, screw it. Let's team up with Universal. On top of this, Twister and Disaster both still close here, mainly because they just take up way too much in the operating budget. Like, they are too expensive to run for such little people to actually be riding them. That brings us to 2016, the year that Skull Island Reign of Kong opened up in our reality. Now, I think because a good part of the graphics for this attraction were pulled from the Universal Studios Hollywood tram tour, I think this attraction still happens in some realities. However, I'm going to be honest, in most realities this doesn't happen. mainly because you gotta still build the queue and the station, and you gotta still, incorporate more graphics to pad out the attraction, and of course you have that massive animatronic at the end of the ride. All that adds up and costs a whole lot of money, making it much more expensive than you might initially think. So if Kong doesn't open up here, what does in this expansion plot? Well, like the other expansion plot, which got what it was initially intended to get, this plot will also get an original idea that came along with the opening of the park, and that is a Jurassic Park Jeep Safari attraction. That's right, folks, we had another Jurassic Park ride, as like I said, this is the anchor. It's 2016, a year after Jurassic World just made $1 billion at the box office. Okay, Universal is going all in on this thing. It makes perfect sense that this would be the extension. Now, maybe there's a possibility that maybe because of the success of Jurassic World, maybe this ends up being a Jurassic World attraction, and maybe they go with something like the Gyrosphere. Now, chances are they're not going to be able to actually recreate the Gyrosphere. It's too difficult. I mean, even modern day Universal really can't pull that off. So it'd probably be something similar to the Gyrosphere, but not really. And yes, this attraction would be much more expensive than Skull Island Reign of Kong, but Universal would find it worth it because of the synergy between their movie studio brand and their parks, as of course Kong is not owned by Universal, it's a public domain property, meaning that anybody can use it and profit off of it. Plus, and I think most of us can agree, that a Jurassic Park attraction would not only bring in more new attendance than a Kong attraction would, but it would also probably sell a whole lot more merchandise. Now, despite this new attraction opening up, we're still not done with 2016. We still have a bit more to go. For one, Beetlejuice Graveyard Review still closes, right? I mean, it's a show, took up a decent amount of operating costs, wasn't really seen by that many people. Bye-bye, see you later. On top of this, Hulk still gets rebuilt. Now, like I said, I mean, they have to kind of invest the money into the Marvel land, whether they like it or not, simply because of the Marvel contract. However, they don't go all out with it, right? They don't have the money to do that. So it doesn't get the upgraded queue, it doesn't get onboard audio, and the tunnel sequence is not updated. It stays as its former form, which quite honestly, I would not mind.
I think this time it's going to work!
Warning. Coolant level dropping. Warning.
And the final thing that happened in 2016 was that Wet n Wild closed. That's right, folks. You might not even known that Universal owned Wet n Wild, or that Wet n Wild ever existed. It wasn't a very well-known or very popular water park, but it was very close to the Universal Orlando Resort. In fact, that is where the Surfside and Dockside resorts currently sit. However, with no need to build those hotels and Volcano Bay just basically a pipe dream, like that's not happening. You don't have the money for that. There is zero reason to close Wet n Wild, and at this point, it stays open for the foreseeable future. That finally brings us to 2017, where of course the big thing in notoriety here, or at least one of the big things, was that Terminator 2 3D closed. However, in this reality, it does not. Even though Terminator Genisys completely bombed at the box office and really was just not well received at all, Universal still sees value in the Terminator property as the attraction is still popular and the IP is still well known. Plus, unlike in our reality, they don't really have the money to spend to replace it, right? Money's kind of tight. If they replace it, then that means they can't build something else that they want to build down their pipeline. One of those things being Race to New York starring Jimmy Fallon, which yes, indeed, still replaces Twister. It's a Universal-owned property that has that synergy between the parks and the TV brand, and it makes sense. You know, as much as people have an issue with it and thought maybe they should go with a better property, I think in this reality, they still go with that ride. Now, another extremely noteworthy thing that happened in 2017 that made a whole lot of roller coaster enthusiasts cry for days was the fact that Dueling Dragons closed its doors permanently and was not only torn down, but thrown away for scraps. Now, in our reality, J.K. Rowling and Warner Brothers pretty much insisted that Dueling Dragons had to go at some point. It was okay if it stayed for opening, but eventually it had to go. It was ruining the immersion because you could see it from the rest of the Hogsmeade land. But, of course, because the Hogsmeade land doesn't exist here and we're still in the Lost Continent, that issue is not at play here. However, there is still an issue that would still get Dueling Dragons torn down, and that's the fact that it may not be dueling. Of course, in our reality, the dueling stopped because several injuries happened from people losing stuff out of their pockets and hitting people on the other trains. So, if we're talking about a reality where that does still happen, I think Dueling Dragons still says goodnight. But if that doesn't happen and Dueling Dragons is still dueling, I think that it either gets completely torn down and rebuilt like the Hulk, or sustains a substantial refurbishment where they really polish up the track. And luckily for all you roller coaster enthusiasts, it stays for time long after you're gone. But here's the thing. We're going to roll with the reality where Dueling Dragons does get torn down and replaced just for fun. Why not? But that being said, we won't see that replacement in 2018. Instead, we will see Fast and Furious Supercharged still open at Universal Studios Florida. I'm sorry, but it's going to happen whether you like it or not. You get rid of Harry Potter, it doesn't matter. Alright? It's a cheap attraction to build because, again, you're taking over the graphics from the Universal Studios Hollywood Tram Tour and translating those into an attraction. And on top of this, it's based off Universal's probably second biggest franchise behind Jurassic Park. I mean, you have to add Fast and Furious to the parks. It makes perfect sense. So yes, as we know in our reality, this attraction sucks. And probably in this reality, it still sucks. If anything, it might be worse because they probably had less money to spend on it. So yeah, it still happens. Sorry, that just is what it is. However, the other thing that happened in 2018 that does not happen in this reality is that the 8th voyage of Sinbad closes forever. In this reality, it closes for a short period of time while Dueling Dragons is getting its refurbishment or getting torn down or whatever it is, but eventually reopens, without constant noise that Hagrid brings along with it that prevents the show from running. It can still operate so long as Dueling Dragons is still there or the new attraction doesn't bring the same kind of noise that Hagrid does. In 2019, the Today Show Cafe opens. Yeah, right, we don't have money for that. Lol, get out of here. On top of this, of course, Hagrid opens, but obviously with no Harry Potter, Hagrid doesn't happen. Instead, we get a different replacement for Dueling Dragons, and I think in this case, it's going to be a How to Train Your Dragon roller coaster. As we all know, there's a decent chance that there could be a How to Train Your Dragon roller coaster in the new Epic Universe theme park. However, with that realistically being a pipe dream, actually not even a dream, just not even a thought for the people working at Universal at this point, How to Train Your Dragon makes perfect sense to come here, even though, the series is kind of winding down to an end at this point. But you want to incorporate more of your brandable IPs that you don't have to pay licensing fees on and can promote synergy between your brands. I mean, this is a perfect place to do it. And, you could use some more family IPs in the park. And How to Train Your Dragon fits in perfectly in the Lost Continent theme. The other thing I'm going to tack on to the end of 2019 that happens in this reality but not in ours is that Kid Zone closes, which, is honestly something that I think all of us have kind of been waiting for to happen. I think in this reality, it does happen in 2019. However, there are some realities where E.T. goes with it. Now, this only happens if something absolutely tragic happens to Steven Spielberg in one of these realities where he passes away, and as a result, that deal where he will pull the plug on Jurassic Park and Jaws, if Universal were to get rid of E.T. at the Orlando Resort, since that's its last place of existence, would in fact be null and void, barring the fact that the deal could still have been passed down to his estate. But if Spielberg is not around, then absolutely this attraction will go, because simply put, without Harry Potter, Universal does not have as big of a die-hard fan base as they do now. As a result, there's nobody holding them accountable for saying, hey, don't get rid of E.T. It's the last opening day attraction. Please don't get rid of it. Like, nobody is going to really care. They don't have that die-hard fan base that's going to, really pull for it. So they're going to pull the plug on it, no problem, right? No questions asked. And it's not going to be a big deal in this reality because they just don't have the same fan base that they do today, thanks to Harry Potter. In 2020, well, you know what happened. let's just say that still happens in this reality, because why not? It really doesn't change anything. I mean, obviously in our reality, Born Stuntacular ended up opening up. Well, without Terminator 2 3D closed, that never happens. So really, nothing happens in 2020. And I think whether or not the what happens and the park's closed for it, I think regardless of that, nothing opens this year anyways. So don't worry about it. And that finally brings us to today, 2021. What do the parks look like today? Well, hold on. Before we get to the big picture, we got to talk about Velocicoaster. Does Velocicoaster come to the parks in 2021? No. Now, even though Jurassic Park is the big anchor of this park, and I think Velocicoaster could come down the line, and it certainly is on the docket for sure, it's too big of an expense. It's too big of an expenditure at this point for them to add on to the other big addition in 2021, which is Super Nintendo World. That's right, folks. It replaces Kid Zone, which closed at the end of 2019, and it will feature the Donkey Kong expansion, I believe so. If they don't have the money, that might come on in a later date. But they do save money in certain places, like for instance, the Mario Kart attraction is no longer augmented reality. That's just too far out of Universal's pay range. So instead it becomes a cheaper screen ride, or maybe like a test track-esque attraction, right? Something that wouldn't cost as much, but still would be kind of like an e-ticket attraction. So drum roll please. And here it is, folks. Here is what the parks would look like in 2021 if Harry Potter never came to the resort. And you can see it's actually kind of interesting how much has stayed the same, but has also gotten extremely different. And I'm sure there actually are a substantial portion of you guys who are like totally down for this, that would much prefer this than the parks we actually have today, because either you really like Jurassic Park or you're just like super hyped that Jaws is still here. So, you know, good for you guys. But I'll be honest, I think that most people would probably be in agreement in saying this is not quite as good as what we currently have at the parks. You know, whether you like Harry Potter or not, or you like how much it takes up in the parks or not, I think that most people would agree that the quality of the parks is better than what it would have been had we not gotten Harry Potter. Though yes, it's pretty cool that we would probably get Super Nintendo World, assuming that they got the Nintendo rights prior to Epic Universe. So we know what the park would look like today if Harry Potter didn't exist, but what about the future of this park? Where does it go from here? Like, how does it shape up without Harry Potter leading the charge? Well, like I said earlier, Epic Universe, have a good night. Maybe in like a couple decades, maybe. But let's keep it smaller picture here. How about Shrek? Shrek is set to close in our reality next year. I think it could still be on the chopping block for this reality, and could easily be the next attraction to go, quite honestly. And the leading rumor for our reality is a Minions attraction. I could see that happening here too. I mean, Despicable Me is still one of Universal's biggest properties, and it makes sense that they would double down on that. As for Revenge of the Mummy, which is getting a refurbishment in our reality next year, I think it's here to stay for this new reality, but quite honestly, I don't know if it gets the refurbishment that it's getting for us. I don't know if they have the money for that. The refurbishment maybe comes down the line, but I don't know if that necessarily is in the cards. Cabana Bay and other hotels are really just kind of pipe dreams right now. Like, the park's just not big enough yet. Now, to be fair, once Nintendo kind of gets going and brings in some of that attendance, maybe you could start seeing some hotels getting built, but I would say, you know, it's not looking great for the resort. Now, that being said, without Harry Potter in the parks, if Nintendo were to come, it would effectively become the new Harry Potter, right? It would start with Super Nintendo World, and then we would get other expansions like Pokemon, Zelda, who knows, Kirby, I don't know, Super Smash Bros. Like, it would go nuts, right? It would take over pretty much the whole parks. I guarantee you, it would become the new major thing right behind Jurassic Park. And when you talk about where these new lands could go, I think when you talk about like the first new land, I think, you know, yes, it would make sense for it to go for an Islands of Adventure, but I think the two places that are easily on the chopping block first would have to be where Fear Factor and Men in Black are, which is on the chopping block in our reality, or, you guessed it, Jaws. Like, that's prime real estate. It's an attraction that has a high operating cost, has mechanical problems, and takes up a ton of space. So if you're talking about another Nintendo expansion down the line, I think Jaws is probably where it ends up. So sorry, all you Jaws fans, it doesn't last much longer after this. On top of this, I think the Lost Continent is here to stay after the How to Train Your Dragon edition. And on top of this, I think Toon Lagoon is here to stay, because even though, once again, the properties are not well known or sell a whole lot of merchandise, the bottom line is the attractions are popular, they're some of the best water rides out there, and there's no real reason to spend the money to retheme them. As for Marvel and The Simpsons, I mean, just really look at the video I made about The Simpsons. That pretty much covers both of these topics. I mean, basically, and even in this reality, the situation is pretty much exactly the same as it is in ours. So check out that video if you haven't, and it should answer all your questions. And with that being said, the bottom line is, folks, that there are millions of different ways that this could have played out. Millions of different possibilities, realities, branches, whatever you want to call them. There are several different ways that the parks could have ended up looking like if Harry Potter never showed up. I mean, there are realities where this decision has even greater impact, as there's even a reality where J.K. Rowling passes away before the rights are given away, and as a result, Warner Brothers teams up with their best buddies, Six Flags, and they somehow get the Harry Potter rights. Coming to Six Flags over Texas, it's Hermione, the ride. This one will be having you saying Leviosa as you ascend 200 feet into the air. It will also have you coming crashing down at 186 feet straight to the ground as Hermione on the onboard audio screams at you for saying it wrong.
It's Leviosa, not Leviosa.
Dropping in at Six Flags Great Adventure is Dumbledore, Drop of Doom. You'll be feeling just like Dumbledore on that fateful day as you ascend 40 stories down to the bottom of the ground with a great view of the park. And dude, honestly, I'm sure that there is a reality where Universal saw my very first video where I proposed an idea for a Chamber of Secrets roller coaster, and instead of building Hagrid's, they build that and they signed me onto the team. And as a result, I stopped making these videos, and this video that you're watching right now never even existed. But in all seriousness, folks, what do you guys think of this new reality? Would you rather have Harry Potter in the parks and have the current reality that we are living in? Or would you rather be in this world where you get Jaws, you get the lost content to stick around, right? You get the How to Train Your Dragon Land, you get Super Nintendo World in the Universal Studios Florida Park. What would you rather see happen? And also, let me know what are the craziest realities you think could have possibly played out if Harry Potter never came to the parks. I love hearing what you have to say. The crazier the better, please. Let me know in the comments, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Man, you know what? I'll see you all next time. Peace.